So to prepare for exporting, I think the first thing we should do here for the jump animation is to render the 2D face animation out, just like we did for the others. So to do that, we need to make sure that our grease paint object is enabled and all the others we still have disabled in the render, and that's good. If we go over to our output, we still have 256 and 24 frames per second. We do need to change our output path here. So let's click on the folder icon here and let's go to our renders folder and let's create a jump folder. I'll create a folder here. We'll call it jump. And if we select that, now we can choose accept, and that's where the renders are going to go. In addition, over in the renders panel, we still have under film, we have our alpha at transparent, and that's good. So what let's do is let's just go ahead and come up here and choose render and render animation. And there it goes. All right, let's see how we did. Let's go over to that renders folder right here. Here's our jump. And there's our jump image sequence. So that's good. That's what we want there. So now that we have that, let's think about how we're going to get this guy out to Unity. First of all, let's go ahead and save this and let's make a copy of this. So let's go over to File, Save Copy, and we want to go to Exports, and we'll call this player_jump. Right here, and save as. There we go. So we know that we can go back to those files and export the 3D body out from each of those files. And actually what we're going to be doing is really using the animations. We'll only be using the 3D character from, say, the idle blend file, and we'll only be using the animations from the other two. So let's begin that. Let's begin exporting our 3D character and animations out. What I'm going to do is go over to File and Open, and we'll go to those exports. And let's go ahead and open up the player idle. And this is the file, this is the main file that we're going to be using to bring in all of our 3D objects. For the jump and the run, we're really only going to use the animation out of those files. But for this one, we need all the objects. So we're going to enable all of these. The character, face idle, face jump, face run. We need the armature as well. However, in looking at this, I'm thinking of something here. Actually, I just realized. So remember how I originally created this timeline as 144 frames. And then to make sure that we didn't have a duplicate on the first and the last frame, I changed it to 143. And this is what I usually do. However, for this particular way of animating the 2D textures, I'm realizing that I'm going to need an even number. And in the next video, I'll show you what I mean here. But the way we're going to be animating these textures, we're actually going to be putting them in a tiled sprite sheet. I better use an even number. So what let's do is let's just go ahead, and while we're here, I'm going to change this to 144. And even though we have a duplicate frame there, I don't usually do this, but as I said, I'm usually only dealing with 3D characters. I'm usually not dealing with a 2D animated texture. So for this, let's do 144. I promise it'll make sense here pretty soon. So, having changed this to 144, I'm going to save this, and I guess what I need to do is go ahead and re-render that out. So just to make sure, I've got my output at 24, 256. Let's put this in the idle. I believe it already is. Yep. And let's re-render these. I'm going to make sure overwrite is checked. And let's go ahead and re-render this. Film is still transparent. Yep. I'm going to go to render animation, and let's do this again. There it goes. So as I said, what I realize I need, because of the way we're going to animate the 2D texture, we're going to need an even number of frames here. All right, so there we go. We've got 144 now. That's good. All right, I'll just Save this, and now with all of these, I want to select the character, the face idle, face jump, face run, and the armature. So I need all of these objects to be exported to the FBX file. So here we go. We'll go File, Export, FBX, and here in our Exports folder, let's go ahead and choose Player Idle FBX. Let's go ahead and give it that name. And down here, we need to make a few adjustments. So we want to only export the selected objects here. And if we come over to armatures, we want to choose only the deform bones and uncheck the leaf bones. And then back in the main section here, we can come down and choose only the armature and the mesh by shift-clicking that. So that's what we need. We need selected objects, deform bones, armature, and mesh. So let's go ahead and click Export. And there we go. All right, so now that we have this done, let's go open up the other two. So I'll go to File, Open, and let's work on the run. I'll come over here, open that up. And for this, let's now enable and choose these objects. Let's enable the face idle, face jump, and the face run. The armature is enabled as well. Let's go ahead and select these. Shift-click all of these and the armature. So we've got the character and the 3 face objects. And then let's do this again. Let's go to File, Export, FBX. We've got Player Run FBX. That's good. Now down here, once again, we want to choose Selected Objects. Under Armature, we'll choose only the deform bones. And down here, we'll choose Armature and Mesh. All right. Export FBX. Okay, let's do it one more time. File, Open. Here's our jump. Let's work on this one. Open that up. Let's enable these. And let's go ahead and select them. So let's select the character, face idle, face jump, face run, the armature, and come over here, File, Export, FBX. That name's good. Player jump. Let's go to Selected Object, Armatures, only deform bones. Back to Main, and we'll choose Armature and Mesh. And there we go. Export that out. Good. Okay, we have that. Now, let's say we go over to Unity and see if we can bring them in. All right, I've opened up Unity and selected New. And for the project name, I think what I'll do is I'll call this Lego character, and I'll say Unity. So we know that everything in this folder is going to be pertaining to our Unity project. I've chosen 3D as my template because we'll be dealing with a 3D character. I've chosen the folder that it's going to go into. So let's go ahead and create the project. All right, here we are in Unity, and what I need to do is come down here into the Assets folder, this window here, and right-click and choose Import New Assets. And in my exports right here, I can choose these FBX files. So I'll choose this one, and this one, and then let's click Import. And those show up down here. Now let's bring in our textures. Remember we had that color texture and the normal map. So let's go Import New Asset, and let's find our textures here. Here they are, the base color and the normal map. So I'll click Import, and there we go. Now what about our 2D animations, our image sequences? Let's take a look at that. If I right-click here and go to Import New Asset, and let's go to the renders, and let's take a look at the idle. If we look at this, this is now 144 individual images. Do we really want to drag all of those into Unity? And how do we deal with them? How do we tell Unity that this is an animation and not just 100 some odd images? Well, the way we can do that is to actually create a sprite sheet. And a sprite sheet is just a single image that has all of these smaller images arranged on it. And this is why I wanted an even number of images. I want to be able to create a tiled sprite sheet that's completely filled, has no gaps at the end. So what let's do is in the next video, let's work on creating our sprite sheets for our idle and jump animations so that we can then bring those into Unity. To create our sprite sheets, we're going to use the free trial version of a program called Texture Packer. And you can get that here at codeandweb.com. And what this will do is it will take all those individual images and it will put them on one single image that we then bring into Unity and tell Unity how to split it up, how to cut it up into the 144 individual images that we need. So all I've done is I've just downloaded the free version of Texture Packer here. And then if we open it up, we get presented with this screen here, and we can of course purchase the Pro version. We would have to purchase the key and then enter it here. But for this project, all we really need is just the free version. So I'll click here, and here we are. So this is Texture Packer. What we need to do is bring in our images over here into this column. So what let's do is come up here to add sprites. And here's our jump. Let's begin with that idle. Let's go in here. And here's all of our frames for our idle. To select all of them, I'm just going to press Control A and then click Open. And here are all of our frames. Now, it's packed it in just automatically in kind of a strange way. I don't want all of these turned sideways. This isn't quite what we need. And what Texture Packer is going to do here is it's going to try and tell us that we need the Pro features to do this. But all we really need to do is just change the algorithm over here to the basic algorithm. There we go. And then what I want to do is change the max size. And for this, for our 144 images at 256 pixels, if I choose 4096 and then take this trim and change it to none, here we go. Now we've got a very nice sprite sheet with all of the blocks filled or all of the tiles filled. If I would have left the animation at 143 frames, this one frame would have been blank. And therefore we would have gotten a little flash at the end of each of the cycles. And that would have been kind of distracting in Unity. So this is why I needed 144. So we would come out even. So we'd get a fully tiled sprite sheet. Now, it's telling us down here that we don't have a particular tool enabled because we don't have the Pro version. That's fine. Let's just disable the feature there. And there we go. So this is what we want. Now all we need to do is publish it. So let's come up here to Publish Sprite Sheet. Click there. And here in our exports, we can go ahead and call this maybe idle _ sprite sheet. There we go. And now we can click OK. All right. Well, that wasn't too bad. Let's go ahead and try the other one. I'm going to come up here and go to File, New Project. Let's add some sprites right here. And this time, let's go take a look at the jump. Here we are. So I'll press Control A and click Open. Now, once again, we need to do a bit of adjusting here. So let's go over here to the algorithm and change that to the basic. For our max size, I think we can keep it at 2048 because we don't have as many images. For the trim, let's go ahead and choose none. And there we go. So that looks pretty good. I'll go ahead and disable this here so we don't get that. Now, you may be wondering, I did all that work previously with the idle to make sure that we had all the tiles filled on our sprite sheet, and yet here we've got 2 that are empty. Well, the reason why I don't care too much about this is this isn't going to be a cycling animation. So the idle will be repeating again and again, whereas with the jump, it'll just be one time. So the animation will begin as he begins to jump, and then it will end as he hits the ground. And then if he jumps again, it'll begin from the beginning again. So we didn't need to fill this up completely because it won't be looping continuously. All right, so let's go up here to Publish Sprite Sheet. There we go. And for this, let's call it jump underscore sprite sheet. And OK. For the run, it's just a single image, so we don't need to worry about that too much. We can just bring in that single image and use it as is. All right, well, let's go over to Unity and bring these in and see if we can set these up. So back in Unity here, let's right-click in the Assets folder, and we'll choose Import New Asset. And over in our exports, we can choose the idle and jump sprite sheets. There we go. All right, well, now let's set these up. If I choose the idle sprite sheet, over here in the inspector, we have some settings that we can use to enable Unity to see this as a single image with multiple sprites. So, as our texture type, we want to change this from default to sprite. And as I said, we want our sprite mode to not be single. We want it to see this as a sprite sheet with multiple sprites on it. So let's choose multiple. We also made this sprite sheet 4096, so we need to change the max size to 4096 here. Now if we click apply, you can see it here. So we have the image set up, but now we need to tell Unity how to cut it up, how to slice it into 144 individual images. So to do that, we come over here to our sprite editor. If we open this up, we can see our image here. And if we come up to slice, we can tell Unity how we want to cut it. So I'll click slice. And instead of automatic, we want to choose grid by cell size. So currently, the pixel size is at 64 by 64. We rendered these out at 256 by 256. So now, if we click slice, it will cut it up into 144 images that are exactly 256 by 256. So if I select one here, you can see this one is 256 by 256, and so are all the others, right? So these are all now exactly the same size, and that's what we want. So now that we've done this, let's come up and click apply. And there we go. All right, let's close this. And now we have our idle sprite sheet set up. You can see if we twirl it down now, you've got all the individual images here. And that's good. So in one image, in one sprite sheet, we've brought in all of these single individual images. And that will save a lot of processing time when the game is running. So if this character is in a game, having these set up in one sprite sheet is a lot more efficient. All right, so let's choose jump, and let's go through the same process here. So over here, we want to choose sprite. Let's choose multiple images. And down here, our max size is correct because we set this up at 2048. So we don't need to do anything there. Let's just click apply. There's our sprite sheet. Now we just need to tell Unity how to cut it up. Let's go to our sprite editor, and we'll click on slice. We've still got 256 by 256. That's good. Let's click slice here. Now if we click on any one of these, you can see they are all the same size. Okay. Now let's come over here and click apply, and then close the window. And there we go. All right, so that's how we set up our sprite sheets. In the next video, let's work on setting up our 3D character in Unity as well. Let's now set up our 3D character in Unity as well. If we come over to the inspector, I've chosen the player idle, and over here in the rig section, we've got two different animation types that we can use. Well, actually we have a couple, but the two main ones here are generic and humanoid. And if we choose humanoid and we click apply, you can see it's gone through, and in the configure settings, we get a check mark, which means yes, it's actually been approved as a humanoid character, and that's good. But over here, real quick, it's saying that a material is being used as a normal map. You can see hair normal. It's saying that it needs to be marked as a normal map, so we just need to click fix now, so we can do that there. Okay, so over here, if we click configure, we can kind of see what it's trying to do. Let me click this. And now we can see our character here in the 3D view. If we click Alt and left click, you can tumble, and then you can click the middle mouse button to pan, and of course scroll the mouse button to zoom. But what it's done is it's gone through and taken a look at our rig, and it's tried to match up the bones that we created with its standard default bones that it wants to use within the humanoid rigging system. And this rigging system is really so that you can create a character and then apply and retarget animations, say, from the Unity Asset Store or anywhere, as long as it's configurable by the system. So having a character that works with the humanoid system here really kind of opens up the possibilities of using animations from all over. But it doesn't always work great because it assumes that you've got a very standard humanoid character. A character with one head, two legs, two arms, fingers and thumbs. And if you don't have that, like our character here, we don't have hands and fingers and thumbs. We have kind of these big claw type things. Look at what it tries to do. Let me scroll down here. Look at what it's done. It's tried to shape our Lego claw hands into some sort of hand that it can recognize. And it didn't quite work. So let's come over here to the left hand here, and let's take a look. So it thinks it sees a ring finger and a pinky, and that's why it's put them one right next to another. We could go through and try and change these to a thumb, right? We could use thumb 1 for the thumb proximal. We could use thumb 2 for the thumb intermediate. And that might work, but I really don't think it's going to help us a whole lot. What I think we need to do is just remove these so the system isn't trying to do this. And to do that, you can just come over and click on the little circle here, and then scroll up and click None. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and just take all of these out. None. I'm going to click on this one here, scroll up, choose None. So I need to go through and do all of these for each of the fingers and each of the hands here. So let me click this one and scroll that up, and None. So there we go. So now it isn't going to try and do that. And over here as well, let's click on the right hand and let's tell it to not even try, just to not even try with our fingers for these hands. All right, and None. There we go. So we've taken those out of the running. We're not even going to allow Unity to deal with that at all. As for, say, the body and the head, it all looks pretty good. It's found bones that it can use, and the head here too, and it all looks pretty good. So now that we've configured that the way we want, we can scroll down here and click Apply, and then Done. And there we go. Now, in addition, we need to set up the animation for this particular character as well. So if I click Animation, let's take a look at this. Now, we have a lot of things going on here, a lot of actions that have come over from Blender that Unity is seeing as possible animations. And we know that this just isn't the case. We only created this one from 0 to 143. It's actually from 1 to 144, but it's seeing it here as 0 to 143. So we need to reconfigure all of this. So what let's do is just begin at the top, and let's just delete these with the minus button here. I'll click that, and that again, and again, and again. I want to keep this one here, but then these two can go away like that. All right, so this is just the idle. We'll just call this idle. There we go. And if we scroll down, we can see how Unity is trying to figure out if this particular animation loops, if it's a cycling animation. And it is. We know it is, because that's what we set it up to be. So we want to turn on loop time here. And it's seeing that the beginning of the animation and the end of the animation match in order for it to loop. So that's why we're getting these green lights over here. So let's go ahead and click Apply here. And now we've got our idle animation set up. We can click down here and hit play, and you can see the idle go through its animation, and it looks pretty good. I'll hit pause here. And now what let's do is let's bring it into the 3D view here and set up the materials and the textures. So to do that, I'm going to just take this player idle and drag it up into the hierarchy window right up here. And there we are. There's our character. We need to give it a material because the material in Blender didn't come through properly here. We need to come down here and right-click, choose Create, and create a material. Let's do that. And let's call this Character. I can then take this material, drag it over here, and just drop it right on the character, and there it is. If we come over and click on our player idle object over here, and scroll down here, we can choose our character, and you can see the material here. So it's been attached as a component to our character in the inspector panel here. I'll twirl this down, and what we need to do is add our color map to the albedo channel and our normal map to the normal map channel. So let's do that. Let's grab our character base color and drag it right over into here. And we want our hair normal dragged right into the normal map here. And there we go. So now you can see the colors, the textures, you can see the sculpt information up here in the hair. So that's looking pretty good. The only thing I'd like to do is maybe scroll out here, and this directional light here, you can see it here. If we select that, I think what I'd like to do is just click on the rotate tool, and let's just turn that until we can see our character a little bit better. There we go, something like that. So I'll click on him and I'll hit the F key to frame that up. There we go. All right, now we need to put some materials on the face objects as well. Let's do that. If I come over here into the hierarchy, I can search for things with a particular keyword. So I'm just going to search for face. And now you can see the three objects that have face in them. So this face idle, here we go. What I need to do is create a material for this. So I'll right click, choose create material. We'll call this face idle MAT. So then let's just take this face idle material and drag it over here. You can see the Blender material is still on here, but it's having trouble dealing with it. So we'll just take this new Unity material and drag it over here and drop it, and that will replace that. So let's go over to the face jump. Let's create a new Unity material. We'll call this face jump MAT. I'll select the object, drag the material onto it, and there we go. We can see it there. One more. Let's create a new material, and we'll call this face run MAT. I'll select the object and drag it on. And there we go. All right, so we've got the idle, the jump, and the run. Okay. So now let's just click on the X here to remove that search term. And there we go. Now we're back here. And what we can do is we can change the type of material these are. So if I choose that face idle material, it's currently a standard material. And what we're actually going to need for this ultimately is an unlit transparent material. And I'll go ahead and change that over here too. Here's the jump. We'll call this unlit transparent. And the run unlit transparent. So that's what we're going to need for those. Now, while we're working with the 3D character, we can go ahead and disable these. I can select this and uncheck this, and that will remove it from the 3D view, at least temporarily, while we're working with the 3D character. And there we go. Okay, so we have our character brought into Unity. We have some materials created. We've applied our textures. In the next video, let's see what that humanoid rigging system can actually do for us. We'll go into the Unity Asset Store, get some character animations, and apply it to our character to see how it works. To test the retargeting on our character, let's bring in a character from the Asset Store. So I'll come over here to the Asset Store in Unity, and we're just going to bring in the standard assets. These are free assets that come with Unity that you can use for testing or for games or for anything you want. I'm going to type in standard assets here in the search field, and then here we are, standard assets Unity technology. So I'll click that. And I've already downloaded this. If you haven't, you may get a download button here, and then you'll have to click import. But for me, I'm just going to click import here. And this will import all of these downloaded assets into our Unity project here. Now there's a lot here, and we're certainly not going to use everything, but instead of going through and trying to figure out only the things that we want, I'm just going to import all of it here. I'll just click import. All right, so now that it's been imported, let's go back to our scene view here, and under our assets folder, we've got this new folder called standard assets. And in here, we've got a folder called characters, and in here we've got a third-person character. Let me open that up, and under prefabs, this is what we want, third-person controller. Now, what I first need to do is create a ground plane, a floor for these guys to move around on. So let's come over here and go to Game Object and 3D Object and Plane. There we go. Let's take this down to 0, 0, 0. 0, tab, 0, tab, 0. There we go. And I want to make it a little bit bigger. This isn't quite big enough to run around on, I don't think. Let's take the scale of this up to 5 in the X and 5 in the Z. That just gives us more room to play with there. And then what let's do is take this third-person controller prefab and drag it up here into the hierarchy. And there we go. Now I'm going to hit the F key and zoom in. Now, there is the character that we brought in from our standard assets. If we click play, I'm just going to come up here and hit the play button. And use the arrow keys, we can run this guy around. Oh, where'd he go? There he is. So we can run him around with the arrow keys, and we can hit the space bar and jump, and hit the C key and duck. So we've got some pretty good animations here with the idle, the run, the jump. So let's see if we can get these animations going on our character. I'll hit the play button here and turn that off. Now keep in mind that when you're animating a character, you're really animating for that particular body type, those proportions. So not all animations are going to work on all characters. And that's sometimes what you need to test before you decide on what kind of animations you want to use. Or if you want to use your own animations, well, like we're going to do here in a bit too. In addition, if we go back to our assets window and choose the player idle, you can see here that we've got warnings. And if we scroll down under this import messages, you can see here that what it's saying is that this particular problem might lower the retargeting quality, that it's having a problem with spine 2. Do you recall that that's the chest bone? And it's having trouble figuring out the rotation of that bone. So that could be a problem. When we do the retargeting here, that might not work. But it's a good test. It's a good process to go through and a good thing to know, so you know you can find animations, say on the asset store, and try them out on your character. All right, so how do you do that? How do you retarget an animation from one character to another? Well, the first thing you need to do is I'm going to take our character, this player idle, and I'm going to drag it right on top of this third-person controller, and that basically parents it or creates a parent-child relationship with this third-person controller. And it's got a lot of components here that's helping it move around in the scene. So by parenting this to this third-person controller, we're going to allow our character to use all of this information, to use the animations, the scripts, etc. And the main thing that's driving the character, the animations, is this animator. And you can see here that the animator has a third-person animator controller, and it's got an avatar, the Ethan avatar. Now, if we come over here to our character and scroll this one down, we see we've got an armature. This one up here has a skeleton. We've got our character. They've got the body here. So it's a similar setup. But if I choose the player idle, you can see we have an animator here as well, but we do not have an animator controller. We've got our player idle avatar. That's good. That was created when we imported it in. But we don't have a controller. And in fact, what we want to do is remove this animator completely so it defaults to the animator up in the third-person controller. So let's click on the little gear here and choose Remove Component. Now, this is going to default up to the top. And what we need to do in this third-person controller, we need to change the avatar. We want to click on this little circle and come over here and choose our player idle avatar right there. Now let's close this. Now we need to take away the body and the glasses of the Ethan character. We could just delete these, but I think what I'm going to do is just come over here and uncheck them right here. And I'm going to select the glasses and uncheck those here. So those are hidden away or disabled in the scene view. All right, so let's give this a try now. If I click the play button, let's see what happens. Well, look at that. Now, can you see him? He's actually going through the idle animation. If I hit the arrow keys, I'll hit the down key. Here he comes. So there we go. We have retargeted the animation to our character. But take a look at how he's standing. The knees are pulled in. The arms are straight down. The animations don't always work from one character to another. So it isn't a strict one-to-one thing. You can just create any old character and grab any old animation, and it'll work perfectly. It isn't quite like that. We can turn him around here. There he is, and I can hit the space bar. There's our jump. I can hit the C key. There's our duck. You can see it's really pulling away here. So this is kind of an extreme example of how not all animations are going to work with all animated characters. But I wanted you to see how it works, just so you can test it out. And there are other animations on the asset store that you can use and give this a try. It's kind of fun. So I'll go ahead and hit the play button to stop that. And now what we should do is work on bringing our own animations in and setting up our animations for our character here. So that's coming up in the next video. To test our animations on the character, I'm going to try and keep things fairly simple, mainly because I'm not an expert programmer. I don't code or script very well. I can do it just enough to get things to work to test a character here in Unity, but I'm certainly not an expert. And if you take a look at this third-person controller over here that comes from Unity, and you take a look at the third-person character script, I'm going to click here and choose Edit Script. And take a look at the script here. I'm just going to scroll down here. There is a lot going on here. The movement and the leaning when he turns and the crouching and just there's so much here. And I'm certainly not going to go through trying to create a script like this for this course. And frankly, I don't know that I could. This is some pretty complex stuff. Also, then, in addition, we have the user controls here for the camera and the controls for a mobile device. And there's just a lot going on. So I think it's beyond my personal capabilities to go into great detail here. I'm not the one to learn scripting from. But what I can do is create a very simple script that will allow us to at least test our animations on our character, run them around, and make sure it's all working okay. And then if I was part of a team that was creating a game, I would hand it off then to the actual programmers. So my interest is really in trying to come up with a very simple script that will at least test the animations on the character. And just like we set up our animations over here in the player idle, we're going to need to do that for the jump and the run. We've already tried the humanoid rig. I'm going to go back over here to rig. We've already tried this. Let's now use the generic, because generic is for things that aren't quite humanoid specific. So maybe it's a dragon with a tail. Maybe it's a dragon with two heads or something like that. Or maybe it's a Lego character with weird claw hands. So let's go ahead and set our character up generic right here. So once I do that, I'll click apply. There we go. Now let's go over to animation, and we've still got our idle here, and we don't have all the green lights down here because the humanoid system isn't trying to figure out whether it's a cycling animation or not. But we do want to make sure loop time is clicked here. If I hit the play button, you can see it go through its animation here, and it looks pretty good from beginning to end. And that's fine. So let's go ahead and pause that. Now, the player jump, I've already gone through and deleted all of the actions here, just like in the idle, and I've renamed it jump. We don't want a loop time here, so I've unchecked this. And for the run, I've also gone through and deleted all of those actions, renamed it to run, and I've chosen loop time here, since that animation, that running animation, will cycle again and again. So if we hit the play button here, you can see there he goes. All right, so now that we have our animation set up, our rigs as generic, what we need to do is set up that animator for our character. I'm going to go ahead and delete this third-person controller here. Just go to right-click and delete, and that'll just take us back to the beginning. Now we can take this idle with our new rig settings and drag them up into the hierarchy and drop them there. We do need to take our character material and drop it on our guy there. And in addition, let me bring up the face objects. I'll just type in face there. And for these, we can go ahead and hide them in the scene. In fact, actually, while we're here, I'll go ahead and drag the materials on and then disable it in the scene view. Here's the jump. Let's drag that on and disable it. And here's the run. Let's drag that over here and disable it. Okay. So now we have our character pretty much all set up the way we had it before. I'm going to go ahead and press Control S and save our scene. Now we need to set up the animator here. When we retargeted the animation, we just removed it. We just deleted it and used the one in the third-person controller. But now we have to deal with this and set it up for ourselves. And what we need is an animator controller to go right here in this slot. So since we don't have one, we just need to create one. Let's go down here and right-click, choose Create, and let's create an animator controller. There we go. And let's call this a player controller. All right, so now if we select our player idle up here in the hierarchy, we can grab that player controller and drag it over and drop it in our animator. So now we have our own controller and our own avatar. Now there's more to configuring the animator that we need to do. We've got an animator tab here. If you don't see that, you can always go to Window and Animation and Animator, and that will bring this up here. Let's go ahead and go over here. And what we need to do is set up the animator in here. And we need to create or drag in an animation that's going to be our entry animation. And then we need to drag in the others, the run and the jump. So let's go down here to our player idle. Let's twirl this down and scroll down, and we can see that idle animation here. That's the one that we set up in the inspector. So I'm going to click and drag and drop. And there we go. Now we've got this initial transition. When we hit play, this is what's going to play first. You can see over here when we select that transition, it says default entry transition. If we were to hit play now, let's see what happens. I'll hit play. So there you go. You can see him going through his idle animation. Let's hit play to stop that. Go over to the scene view and let's move that camera. I will select the move tool here and let's just move that camera forward. And then I'll select the rotate tool and I'm just going to spin it around like this. Here we go. In fact, I can just come over here and type -180. There we go. And maybe I'll go to the move tool again and move it in just a little bit closer like this. Yeah, there we go. So now we can see him. Now I'll hit play. And there he is. So now you can see him going through his idle animation. And that's all we needed to do to kick that off. If we stop that and go back to our animator, now we need to figure out how to use our jump and run animations in here. Well, first of all, we need to just drag them in. So let's scroll down the player jump, find that jump animation, and let's just drag that in. There we go. And then for the run, let's scroll this down, grab the run, and drag that in there too. There we go. So we've got the run, the jump, and the idle. And just like we have this transition going in from the entry point into the idle, we need transitions going from idle to run and then back again, and from idle to jump and then back, and also from the run to the jump and from the jump to the run. So we need to create several transitions here. And when we do, we also need to create a parameter that'll allow us in our script to tell Unity which animation to play when a particular key is pressed on the keyboard. So let's say I push the up arrow on the keyboard, we want the run animation to begin. And if I hit the space bar on the keyboard, I want the jump animation to begin. So we need a parameter that allows us to tell Unity what to do, what animation to play when we hit a particular keyboard button. So let's go ahead and create a new parameter. I'm going to click plus here, and I'll create an integer. Now, you can use a Boolean. I've seen people use Booleans, and it works just fine. But in my head, I can understand the way an integer works for this a little bit better. Let's give it a name. I'm going to call this anim par, or animation parameter. And now let's create our transitions. So let's create our first transition from the idle to the run. I will right-click on the idle, choose Make Transition, pull the mouse down, and then left-click the mouse, and that creates that transition. So let's select it now, and here we have it going from the idle to the run. If we hit the play button here, we can see him idling, and idling, and idling, and then run. So that's all we have there. We want to create a condition here that says if this condition, if this integer is 1, let's say, then he should begin the run. He should transition from the idle to the run. So let's go ahead and hit the plus here. We get the animation parameter here since it's the only one we've created. And we want to say if the animation parameter equals 1, then what it should do is transition to the run. And when this happens, we want it to happen immediately. As soon as we hit the button, we want him to begin the run animation. So we want to turn off exit time. He doesn't need any exit time from the idle to the run. So I'll uncheck that. All right. So that's good. But what if he stops running and goes back to the idle? How do we do that? Well, let's right-click, choose Make Transition, and create a transition back to the idle. Let's select this one. Now let's create a condition. Let's say that if the animation parameter is equal to 0, then we transition back to the idle. And we do it immediately. We don't need any exit time here. So if we hit the play, you can see he runs, and then he goes immediately back to the idle animation. All right, so we use the integer 1 for the run. How about we use integer 2 for the jump? So let's right-click on the idle, choose Make Transition, and let's drag this over here and click. Now for this transition, we want the animation parameter to equal 2. There we go. And we want it to happen immediately, so we'll turn off exit time. So now if we hit play, he'll idle and idle and idle, and then he'll jump. There we go. So that's what we want. Now, if he jumps and immediately goes back to the idle animation, we need to set up that transition. So I'll choose Make Transition, drag over here and click. Now let's select that one. And we need to say that if there is a condition where the animation parameter equals 0, we go to the idle, right? Just like this one over here. So anytime the animation parameter equals 0, it's always going to go back to the idle animation. All right, so this one with 0, I need to turn off exit time here as well. Now what happens if we go from the run to the jump or the jump to the run? Let's make a transition from the run to the jump, and let's select that, and let's say that if the animation parameter equals what? The jump is 2, right? The idle is 0, run is 1, jump is 2. So if it equals 2, we want to transition from the run to the jump, and we want to do it immediately. And now how about from the jump to the run? So for this one, we want it to be 1, right? We want the animation parameter to equal 1, which would take it to the run. Oh, and we want to have it happen immediately, so we'll turn off exit time. So basically, the idle is 0. Anytime the animation parameter equals 0, we're going to transition to the idle. Anytime that parameter is 1, we're going to transition to the run. And anytime the parameter is 2, we will transition to the jump. All right, so that sets up our animator here. What we'll do in the next video is actually begin creating the script that will allow us to change that animation parameter from 0 to 1 to 2 and back again. To transition from one animation to another, we're going to need to create a script. So let's begin doing that. I'll switch back over here to the scene view. And we're kind of getting a little disorganized here. So let's go ahead and create a few folders and organize things a bit. I'm going to right-click, create a folder, and let's call this materials. And I'll just grab these materials here, like this, and I'll drag those into my materials folder. Let's create one for our textures. And I'll just take the base color, the hair. Let's go ahead and take the sprite sheets as well. Those are textures, basically. Let's put those in there. And all of this, even though we used the idle for the character model, we're using these for animation. So I'm just going to create a folder and call it animations. And let's just take all of these and drop them in there. And also, let's create a scripts folder too. We're going to need that. So there we go. Now in this scripts folder, I'll go ahead and right-click and choose Create. And let's create a C# script. Let's call it Player. And there we go. Now we can take our player idle. We can select that over here in the hierarchy. And we can grab this player script and we can drag it over here and drop it onto our character. Now, in addition, we're going to need a character controller. So we're going to need a component in here that we can actually use to control the character. So let's click on Add Component. Let's come down here to Physics, and let's choose Character Controller. And there we go. Now, we've got this capsule around him, so we're going to need to adjust that a bit. I'll click on the Z-axis here to spin around to, well, we better choose the X-axis to spin around to his left side, and then I'll click this to switch from perspective to orthographic view. Now we need to configure this. So the height of the capsule is currently 2 meters. Our character is 1 meter, so let's just type in 1 and hit enter. We need to move it up in the Y, so let's move it up 0.5 meters in the Y, and then we need to change the radius. So maybe the radius instead of 0.5 is, let's try 0.25. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Tumble back around, and that looks pretty good. I'll click here to change from orthographic or isometric to perspective. Now that we've got that set up, we need to configure it in our script as well. So I'm going to double click on our player script, and that will bring up Visual Studio here on my system, and here is our script template. So as I said, the first thing we need to do is set up that character controller and also set up that animator. Those are two things that we've created that this script needs to be able to communicate with. So let's click here, and I'm going to hit enter to go to the next line. And I want to create a private variable for the character controller. So I'm going to type in private character controller, and I'll just call it controller. Semicolon. There we go. Now we also need to create a variable for the animator. So let's call this private. It's going to be of type animator. And we'll just call it anim. There we go. So now we've got the variables for the controller and the animator. I'm going to go ahead and save it here just to make sure I don't lose anything. So as soon as we start the game, we need to take that variable and put it into memory. So let's go ahead and in the start function here, as you can see, it's called before the first frame as soon as the game begins. Let's take that controller and let's put in that controller the character controller that we just created. So I'll say get component. Here we go, that's what we want. And I'll create these little guys, the little arrows, and we'll grab that character controller. And then 2 parentheses and a semicolon there. And we'll do the same thing for the animator. We'll take that anim variable and we'll fill it with the game object component in children. We want this game component in children there, and we'll give it the animator. There we go. 2 parentheses and a semicolon. There we go. So we're creating the variable, and then we're grabbing the components from the scene, from the objects in the scene, and we're putting those in those variables. Now what do we do with those? So what let's say is under here in the update function, what we need to do is say if the up arrow is pushed, then we need to kick off the run animation. We need to change the animation parameter to 1, right? So let's say if our controller is on the ground, we need to make sure it's on the ground. So we say is grounded. And we find that there is input from the key, the up arrow. So in this parentheses here, I'll type in up. If that's the case, if the controller is grounded, oh, I need to add an R here, don't I? Controller, there we go. If the controller is grounded and we see there's input coming from the up key, from the up arrow key, then what let's do is let's change that animation parameter to 1. So let's create our brackets here, and let's say the anim variable, we want to set that integer. Do you remember we used integer? I'll double click this. We want to set that integer of the anim parameter to 1. There we go. So what we're doing is we're setting the integer for the animation parameter to 1. Now, if you don't have anything coming in, if there isn't any input coming in from that up arrow, what are you going to do? Well, what you can do is say else if the controller is just grounded but there isn't anything else happening, then what we should do is make sure that animation parameter, that integer, is set. Anim parameter is set to 0. There we go. So once again, this is what we're saying. We're saying that if the controller is grounded, that animation or that character controller, that capsule that we just created, if it's touching the ground and the up arrow is pushed, then we're going to change the animation parameter to 1. Otherwise, if the controller is grounded and nothing is happening, then we're going to leave the animation parameter at 0. All right, now what happens if we hit the space bar, if we want him to jump? Well, let's take a look at that. We can come down here and say if we've got input coming in for the space bar or the jump key, because the space bar in Unity is just automatically set up as the jump key. So we'll just type in jump, and the controller is grounded. Then what are we going to do? Oops, I have a comma here instead of a period. Let's put that back. There we go. Then let's add our brackets. So what are we going to do here? If we get input from the space bar and the controller is grounded, then we need to set that animation parameter, right? Same thing. Anim par to 2. Semicolon. There we go. So that's how we kick off the animations. We're not moving the character at all yet. We're not moving him around the ground plane or pushing him up when he jumps. We're not doing any of that. We're just kicking off the animations. Now the last thing I want to do is add a little gravity so that we push down on that controller to make sure that it's grounded when he isn't doing anything. So what we need to do is we need to create a new variable up here at the top. And it's going to be a vector3. It's a move variable that encompasses x, y, and z all in one. So let's just come up here and let's create another private variable. And let's call it a vector3. So that encompasses all 3 axes. And let's just call it move direction. And let's make sure that everything is set to 0. All the axes are set to 0. There we go. So we've got this vector3. Now we can use it down here. Let's just go down a couple of lines here, and now we can create our gravity. So let's take that controller and let's use that move direction here, and we're going to multiply it by what's called time.delta time. And what that does is it makes the movement constant. If we didn't do that, it would pull down based on the frame rate of the game, and the frame rate of the game can fluctuate depending on the power of the console or the computer or the mobile device. So to keep the force constant, we need to affix it to time, and that's what that time.delta time will do. It will make sure the force is based on a constant time. So let's now take that move direction, and in the y-axis, that up-down axis here in Unity, let's subtract a gravity times time.delta time. Here we go. So we're taking the amount of gravity and subtracting it every second, pulling down in the y-axis. Now we've got a red squiggly line here, and if we hover over it, it says the name gravity does not exist. Well, That's because we haven't created it as a variable yet. So let's do that. Let's now come up here, and I'm going to move down to here, and now we'll begin creating our public variables. So let's create a public float. A float is just a number with a decimal point as opposed to an integer. And let's call this gravity, and we can set it to anything at this point in time. Let's just set it to 20, and we'll do 0.0 f for float and semicolon. And there we go. So let's press Control S to save that script. And now let's give it a test. Let's give it a try. Let's go back to Unity, and with our player script here in the inspector for our player idle, let's go ahead and hit play. So there he is idling. Let's now hit the up arrow, and he runs, and let's hit the jump, and he goes through the jump animation. So there we go. Now I see he's hovering above the ground plane just a bit. Let's take a look at that. I'll hit the play button, and let's go over here and let's see what's up with this. Yeah, let's see if we can take that skin width down. Let's we've got skin width here to at 0.08. Let's take that down to just 0, and what that'll do, if I hit enter, it'll then take it down to the lowest possible number. So let's see if that helped. I'll hit play again. And yeah, so now he's firmly on the ground. All right, I'll hit that up arrow again, and he runs, and I'll hit the jump, and he goes through his jump animation. If we come over here to the animator, we can see the idle cycling through the animation. If we come back here to the game, there he is. All right, so we have our animations set up in our script. I'll go ahead and stop this. So in the next video, what we need to do, I'll go back to perspective here. What we need to do is work on setting up the 2D animations. What I'd like to do is see those 2D face animations play at the same time that the 3D animations do. So in the next video, we'll work on that. All right, now let's try and see if we can get the face animations to work. There are a couple of parts to this. First, we need to modify the script here to turn on and off the appropriate face object. So when the idle animation is running, we need to only have the face idle on here. We need to have it enabled here. And when the jump is activated, we need to activate the jump here, etc. So that's what we'll be doing in this script, just turning them on and off, that's all. To actually play the animations, we're going to have to create yet another script, and this one is going to be one that we can find out on the web. So let's first go grab that. If you go to wiki.unity3d.com and search for animating tiled texture, you'll find this page that has a few different scripts to run through a tiled texture, a sprite sheet, and animate it on an object as a texture. So if we scroll down here, there are a few that are fairly basic scripts, but there's one down here, right here, this animated tiled texture extended. This is the one I want. This is pretty detailed. It's got a lot going on in it, and it has quite a few settings that we can adjust once we attach the script to our player object. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and grab everything underneath this public class line here. I'm just going to grab this curly bracket, and I'm just going to click and drag all the way down to the bottom of this script, right down here. I don't need this part down here or this one. I'm just going to end right here, and I'm going to press Control C to copy it to my clipboard. Now back in Unity, I'm going to create a new script in my scripts folder, a C# script, and I'll call this animate tiled texture. And if I open this up, we get the base default template here, and I just want to delete everything under that public class and press Control V. And there we go. Now, there are a couple of things that's going to happen here. This is an older script. So what happens is anytime we see this renderer here, this is an older way of doing things. You can see what we actually need is this get component renderer parentheses. So what let's do is let's just go ahead and type that in, and then we'll copy and paste from that. So get component renderer parentheses. Here we go. Let's just delete this. Type in get component, and then we'll type in renderer, and then open and close parentheses. And there we go. So now let's just select this. Let's just highlight this. Control C to copy. And anywhere where we see renderer, let's just paste this in. Here's one here. Here's one here. And all the way down here. Looks like we have quite a few, huh? So this just happens as Unity is updated. Scripts become out of date, and we sometimes have to update them in this way. So let me grab this and paste that. Looks like we've got one more here. Control V, paste. Okay, so that's all we did, is just replace the word renderer with get component renderer parentheses. That's it. So let's come up here now and let's hit save. There we go. And now let's go back to Unity, and I'll go ahead and select one of these face objects. I'll select the face idle, and I'll turn that on. Let's go ahead and hit the X here to come out of that search mode. So currently we have the face idle object enabled. We've got our unlit transparent shader on it. And now what I want to do is just take this script and just drag it and drop it right over here. Now we have a lot of settings here that we can use. We aren't going to use all of them, but what I do want to do is make sure that our sprite sheet is in here in the shader. So let's come over to our textures, and this idle sprite sheet, we need to click and drag right into here and drop there. And you can see then all the different images in our animation here on the face. So what it's going to do is that script is going to try and animate through this whole thing and project that onto that face object. So if we open this up again, I'll just double click that. We have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 images across and 3, 6, 9 images down. So what let's do is go ahead and plug in 16 columns by 9 rows right here. And our frames per second is 24. And we want to play on enable. So whenever this is enabled, we want to play this animation. So let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. I'll come over here and hit play. And there he is. Look, he's blinking, he's idling, and looking around, all at the same time. So what we're doing here is we're animating our 3D object, and as you can see, we're animating the 2D images all at the same time. Pretty cool. All right, so let's go ahead and hit the play and stop it. Now what let's do is select the face jump, and let's also add that animation as well. So over here in the shader, let's grab that jump sprite sheet and drag that into the texture here. Now if we open this up, we can see we've got 2, 4, 6, 8 by 4. All right, so let's plug that in. We need to take that script here in our scripts folder and drag it over here. There we go. And so we said, what, 8 by 4? 4. And we also want it to be 24 frames per second. And in addition, we want it to play on enable. So when we hit that space bar, we will put into the script to disable the face object and enable the jump object. Now for the run object, we don't need a whole lot here. We just need that single image of the face in here. I don't think I've brought that in yet. So let's go over to our textures folder. Let's right click. Let's go to import new asset. And that's probably going to be in our renders here. Here's the run, and there it is. So let's click import. There we go. Now we need to tell it what type of image it is. Let's go over here and let's call it a sprite. It's a single image, and the max size can be 256. And let's apply. Okay, so there he is. Let's now grab that face run object over here, and let's click and drag that run face image right in there. There we go. Okay, so we're all set up with our textures and our animating script. In the next video, let's work on modifying that player script so that when we hit the up arrow, we kick off the face animation for the run. When it's at 0, we play the face animation for the idle. And when it's at 2, we play the face animation for the jump. The first thing we're going to need is a few more variables. You know what, let me come down here and I'll just change this. Maybe I could just type in 125 and let's zoom in a bit. There we go. Just makes it a little bigger in the screen here. So let's create a few public variables that will house our face objects. So let's create a public game object. And let's call one of them run face variable. How's that? And let's do the same thing. Let's just select this and copy this and paste it. And we'll call this jump face variable. We'll do that again, paste, and this one can be idle face variable. There we go. Now when we first start the game, we want to fill those variables with the actual game objects in the scene, these geo face objects. Let me move this over. So these things here. If I search for these again, type in face here and select one, we can actually see the path of where they are. They're in the player idle object, and they're down in the armature, root, spine, 1, 2, neck, head, and finally the face idle object. And what we're going to need to do is put in the script that path so we can tell Unity where to find this object. So if we come back over to the script here, what we want to do is say the run face variable can be found as a game object find in, let me put quotes in that because that's going to be a string. We're going to need to type in all of this. So I'll put in a / and we'll call this player _ idle / armature / root and on through all of this here. So we've got spine 1, spine 2, neck, head, and finally geo face idle. So it has to all be just the same with the same capitals, the same spelling and everything. And then of course a semicolon at the end to end the line. We need 2 more for the jump and the idle. So I'm just going to grab all of this and press Control C, Control V, and let's change this to jump. And we'll change this to jump back here. Like that. Then let's paste again. Control V. And let's change this one to idle. And let's put Oh, we've already got idle here. So, oh, I see what I did wrong. I need to change this to a run. There we go. So we have the run face variable being filled by the geo face run, the jump into the jump variable, and the idle into the idle variable. All right. I'm going to go ahead and click save up here. And now we need to tell it what to do when we hit a particular key. So if we hit the up arrow key, and just as an FYI, if you want to use the W, A, and D keys instead of the arrow keys, you can just change this to a W, and that will automatically be seen as the W key, and the A and D key will work as well. So just an aside there, just wanted to let you know that. Now down here in the update, what we can do is say if we press the up arrow, we turn on the geoface run object and we turn off the other two. So to do that, we can say run face variable dot set active is true. And then we want to be sure the others are turned off. So if I copy this and paste it, I can say maybe idle face variable is going to be false. And also I can copy and paste this, and this one can be the jump. Jump face variable can be false. So we're turning on the run object and turning off the other two. All right, so let's just copy all of these now. Control C. And if we are grounded, what's going to happen? Well, we can paste these, and we know that for the idle, for 0 here, we want the idle to be true. We want the other two to be false. There we go. Now what happens in the jump? Well, for the jump, we can paste these, and we want the jump to be true, and the other two to be false. There we go. So let's see what happens. I'm going to save the script here. Let's go back to Unity. I'm going to hit that X here. We turn that off. I'm going to save, and then let's hit the play button. All right, so we see the idle. He's blinking, he's idling, and looking around. Now let's hit the run. I'll hit the up arrow, and now he's determined, angry, or whatever he's supposed to be. There we go. And back to the idle when I release that. Now let's hit the jump. Now, why doesn't that work? Well, I have a theory. Let me hit the play button to turn that off. And I think it's because if we go back into the player script, we scroll down here, what we have is when the spacebar is pushed and it's grounded, we want to begin or enable this jump face object. And as soon as we enable it, the animation is going to begin. Well, the problem is it never comes off the ground. So as long as it's staying on the ground, it's continuing to be re-enabled. And every time it's enabled, it only plays that first frame. So it's just being enabled again and again and again and again at every frame. And that's why it isn't playing the animation. To fix that, what we need to do is get them up off the ground. We need to go ahead and create the part of the script that will push them up for the jump. To do that, let's come up to the top and let's create a new variable up here. So we have gravity, but let's also create a public float for our jump force. Let's call it jump force. And let's say that this force is equal to, well, if gravity is 20, let's say the jump force will be 10. So 10.0 F for float and a semicolon there. So let's do that. And then down in our jump section here, we need to push him up in the Y when we hit the spacebar. So let's say move direction dot Y. instead of pulling down like we did down here, let's just push up with jump force. There we go. All right, so let's save this, and I'll go back to Unity. And if we hit the play button and hit the space bar, he just jumps right out of frame, and we can't see if the animation for the face turns on. So what let's do is take this camera. Let's take the camera and let's just parent it to that object, just temporarily. So when he jumps up, the camera will go up as well. So let's hit play. And we hit the space bar. There he goes. You see that? Now it's continuing on through the animation. So the problem was he was grounded, and all the while he was grounded, that face object continually became active and therefore continually only began, say, at frame 1. So it never was able to complete the animation all the way through. All right. Well, now that we have everything set up, we have the run and the jump. Now what we need to do is get him moving around the scene. So that's coming up next. All right, now let's see if we can get this guy moving around. If we go back into our player script, what we can do is create another couple of variables, one for our speed and one for our turn speed. So up here, let's create another public variable here, and let's make it a float, and let's call it speed, and let's make this equal to, I really don't know. We're just going to have to try it and see what's going to work, what speed is going to work. And when we create these public variables, what happens is they become available to us in the inspector. So let me save this. And if we go to our player idle, you can see that over here, those public variables show up as adjustable settings over here in the inspector. So we'll be able to change our speed, our gravity, jump force, whatever we need here as we test our character. All right, let's go back to that player script again. And we also need turn speed. So let's create a public float. We'll call it turn speed. And we'll set this to, I don't know, 50 as well. We'll just go with that. I'll press Control S to save it. And now down here in the update function, we need to apply those speed variables when we run. So what let's do is right in here, we can say that that move direction that we created earlier should transform forward when we get input from the vertical input. So let me show you what I mean by this. What Unity will do, well, before I do that, let me just add times speed. Here we go. So if we come over here into Unity and we go to Edit, Project Settings, and we look at our inputs here. Let me open this window up just a little bit. Scroll down the axes. We can see that that vertical here actually coincides to the up and down arrows on the keyboard. So when we put in vertical, let me go back to that script. Here, when we put in vertical, what we're saying is look for input from the up or the down arrows. And when you get that input, move it forward at the speed of this speed variable. That's all we're doing here. We're just using Unity's preset names for the inputs. And likewise for horizontal, you can see here that we've got the left and the right keys as well. All right, so let me close that, go back to our script. And so to use that horizontal, what we can do is we can say that we can turn if we get input, get axis from anything that is by default part of that horizontal input. There we go. So we can just say the turn is going to be acquired from those horizontal inputs. And lastly, we can say that we want to turn in what axis. So if we get input from those horizontal keys, the left or the right, around which axis are we going to turn? So we can say transform.rotate. And here we need to plug in the 3 different axes. So the axes are X, Y, and Z. So we want to turn around the Y-axis. So we can have the X and Z be 0, but the Y, we want to turn and multiply it by that turn speed and multiply it by that time dot delta time. So it turns at a constant rate and doesn't fluctuate with the variable frame rate. Time dot delta time. And there we go. So this right here should allow us to move forward at the variable speed and to also turn in the y-axis. So let's copy this, Control C, and let's move this down into the else, right down here. And since the else is the idle, when we aren't moving at all, let's change the speed to 0. So we want to be able to do all of this, but just not move forward. All right, let's give this a try. I'm going to press Control S to save the script. And now let's go back to Unity. And I want to do a couple things before I begin testing the movement. First of all, this big white plane isn't real good for seeing movement. We need something on the plane, some sort of texture, so we can see that we're moving across it easily. And what I've done is I've dragged into my textures folder this checkerboard pattern. And I'm just going to drag it and drop it onto that ground plane. There we go. So now we have something that we can see the movement a little easier. I'm going to select it and then come over here to the shader, and I want to change the tiling here from 1 to 5 by 5. Yeah, that makes it a little bit smaller. So now we'll be able to see the movement across the plane a little bit easier. Secondly, I really don't need this camera parented to my character anymore. So I'm just going to take this and drag this out of that hierarchy. And here it is now here. But I really want the camera to follow the character as he moves around. And the great thing about the standard assets that we downloaded from the asset store a couple of videos ago is that it has this cameras folder in it. And then if we go to prefabs, it's got this multi-purpose camera rig. And this is pretty cool. So I'm just going to click and drag this into the hierarchy. And you can see there's the camera there. Now we can't have 2 cameras in the scene at the same time. So I'm just going to take this main camera and hide it. Just uncheck it here. So we only have this one as part of the camera rig. Now the cool thing about this is if you look over here, it has a feature to auto-target anything that is tagged as player. You can see the tags up here. So if we select our player idle and come up here to tags, it's currently untagged, but if we tag it as a player, now this multi-purpose camera rig will automatically point the camera at it and follow it. All right, so let's give it a try. I'm going to come up here and hit the play button. And now I'm going to hit the up arrow. Whoa! And there he goes. He's really fast. Let's slow him down some. I'll hit the play button again. And if we choose the player idle, we can come over here into the script, and this speed is way too fast. So let's maybe take this down to 10 and see how that works. I'll hit the play button again. And now let's hit the up arrow. There he goes. A little bit better, but he's still pretty fast. I'm going to hit the play button again. And let's change it to, let's try 6. And for the turn speed, I'm going to take this up to maybe 60. Let's try this. So I'll hit the play button again. Here we go. So I'm going to hit the up arrow and the left arrow. This isn't bad. And whoa, there he goes. I better turn it off. Let's try this again. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the play button again, and let's try and adjust these while the game is on. See if that works. So let's take the turn speed up to 100, and I'll click back into the game view, and then I'll hit the up arrow. And now that he kind of turns a little bit quicker, that's a little better. All right, and he can jump. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, this feels a little bit better. The speed of the turn is pretty good. The jump isn't high enough, is it? So let's take the jump force back up to, well, let's take it back up to 10. Let's try this. Click back here, up arrow. He turns pretty well. You can see that face animation kick off when he jumps. Good. Yeah, I like the jump like that. It's pretty high, but I like it. Yeah, I think we're doing pretty well. So what have we got here? We've got jump force at 10, speed at 6, turn speed at 125. So let me turn off the game. So here we had 10 and 6 and 125. Well, there's a last few things that we could do to finish up here. I think one thing we should do is create a prefab of our player. Remember when we brought in our multi-purpose camera rig and the character from the standard assets? They were all in prefabs folders, like the character, third person prefabs, right? And what these are just game objects that store all of your predefined settings, components, scripts, all into one game object. So we don't have to do it again every time we drag the player into a scene. So what we could do is go back to our assets here, and we could select our player idle. And we could just drag this from here down into the assets folder to create a prefab. We'll just take this, drag it down, and there we go. And it asks us, would we like to create an original or a variant? And I'm going to create an original. So let's just do that there. And in addition, what we can do is we could grab this ground plane as well. It's got a material and a texture and a size. Maybe we want it this same way in a new level. So we could take our ground plane and drag it down here, and it automatically becomes a prefab. Now we could take these two in the hierarchy and delete them, like this. And now we can just take these and drag them in. Here's our ground plane, and here's our character. And all the settings have been saved in those, so if we hit play, there we go. It all works just the same as it did before. So creating prefabs is a great way to save all your settings, save all your work, so you can take this character or any game asset into other scenes or levels. Well, thank you for joining me on this journey through game character creation. I've certainly had fun creating this little guy. I hope the course has been useful and fun for you as well. And I wish you happy creating. Now, I'm going to get back and play with the character a little more. Ha ha!